Welcome to this week's episode of Conquer the Day. We have the distinct privilege and honor of speaking to Pierce Showe. Pierce is a 22-year-old faith-filled ultra endurance runner on a mission to inspire people to become all who God has created them to be by learning to do hard things. Pierce has achieved some amazing feats in not just regular running, whether that's marathon running, half marathon running, but has some amazing feats when it comes to ultra long distance running. In 2023, Pierce became the youngest person to complete the Triple Crown of 200s, which required him to complete 3 200-mile races in a span of 3 months. I want you to hear that. That was 3 200-plus mile races in less than 3 months. 2 of these 200-mile races took place in just 18 days. So a very, very small window, which is just a remarkable feat. Today, we're going to be discussing the mentality that Pierce has developed and really tap into some of those different practical lessons about psychology, about mindset, about endurance that have allowed him to not only achieve superhuman status, but more importantly, find ways that we can apply to our own life and we can start to push ourselves in our own journey as well. Pierce, thank you for being a part of the show. Thank you for all you do. We're excited to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on. It's so amazing what you guys are doing with the fitness project and this podcast. Brian, I know ever since I met you, I feel like I just met like a long lost friend because we connected and it was like an instant connection where you go deep because it's on similar. We share a lot of the same values, and so I'm sure I connect with a lot of the people listening to this. But yeah, I'm excited to dive in. I promise you we'll get to it, but I'm not superhuman, even though some of those things are superhuman. If you take a knife to my arm, it would cut and blood would come out. I'm not biomechanic, but God has just grown me, and through progressively doing one hard thing after the next, I looked up and I did those races. So I'm excited to talk about it and share the lessons that you can apply in your life today.
I love it. That's awesome. Well, you may have already answered this first question, but what leads someone to decide, let's do this massive goal of a triple crown? And was that the initial goal, or was it just, I'm going to run 200 miles? Either way, what led you to make that decision or set that goal?
Yeah, 100%. That's a great question. Thanks for asking. So essentially, I want to explain a little bit of like the lead up to that, right? So it makes sense for the listeners, and so you don't just think, "Oh my gosh, that's impossible. I could never do it." I would never even try to do that, right? But so when I was in high school, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and really big in my neighborhood and in high school was lacrosse. Like that was the sport. And we went to did well in the state tournament every year. That was like sport to play, the thing to do. And so by the time I got into high school, it was time to try out for varsity. And during varsity tryouts, there was this week at the first week of tryouts called Hell Week. And they called it that because it's just a ton of conditioning. And what do you hate doing? Conditioning, right? Especially in high school. So before every practice, like literally to start the practice, we had to run a 5K before every practice, the first like 5 or 6 days. And I don't even know how old I'd be, but a freshman in high school, that sounds miserable. And maybe you're even listening to this thinking, oh my gosh, a 5K sounds miserable. I'd never want to do that. And that's exactly where I was at. But what I realized is after being forced to do that, because that was the part of tryouts, I realized I was actually not that bad at it. And that I it was one of the things I was better at, and I was never the best. What I like about running too, it's really about grit and mental resilience. And you don't have to be the most talented, but if you have grit, you can get through it. And so anyway, I run this 5K. I realize I'm actually pretty decent at it. So by the time I'm junior, senior year, I'm like finishing first out of the team. And I had seen growing up, my mom was big into running. She never talked about it. She never was like, oh, look at me. But she did a marathon every year and has now done it for the last 30 years. And so I saw her set that example, and she never told me to run, but I was like, oh, if she could do a marathon, maybe I could do a half marathon. And so that's, such a lesson in that of the power of a good example. It's a good example is worth, 1,000 words, right? And so um, she set that example. I thought, man, maybe I could try it. And I went out to do a half marathon the fall of my senior year of high school. And so during this half marathon, I was training for it, prepping for it. I had no clue what I was doing. I didn't know how to fuel, didn't know, what paces to run, how many miles to week to run, when my long run should be. I didn't even know what, a long run was. Um, and so I was met also with these questions from other people of, hey, do you know how to fuel? Are you sure you think you can do this? This, that, and the other. And when I wasn't very sure myself of even doing it because I hadn't done it, it felt like they were doubting me. And I'm like, man, you're not going to doubt me. I'm going to go do it. And also, I kind of built like a little bit of, I'll show you. So, anyway, I did this half marathon and I finished it. And I was like, man, I did it. I didn't die. Like these people doubted me. I was able to do it. I doubted myself. I was able to do it. And so it really unlocked this belief for me after finishing something that I didn't think I could do was what else is possible? What else can I do? And so that led to a full marathon a couple months later, then a half Ironman. Then I read David Goggins' book and heard about these ultra marathons. Was like, oh, if David Goggins can run 100 miles without a lot of training, like he just went out and did it, maybe I could with training. So I trained up from 50 to 60 to 100. And then, yeah, I sure enough found myself doing a 200-mile race. So that's kind of the buildup. And I wanted to explain that because I didn't just go from, not running to running 200 miles in 1 year. It was like a process from 2018 to 2023. So about 5 years. And, I had so many good examples along the way, like my mom, who just put in the work, didn't talk about it, but I saw it and I was inspired.
That's so important, yeah, especially thinking of the power of a great role model. If you're zooming in though to, let's say, 4 months out before the race or whatever the timeline was that you decided to do the race, what motivated you to do all three? What was the driver to going and pushing yourself to this, I'm just going to say extreme of a feat, but what was really the motivation to do all three or to do something at that scale? What was the driver?
Yeah, 100%. So originally, I wanted to do this race called the Badwater 135 because I heard it was like the toughest foot race on earth. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to try that in some sick way. Anyway, so I figured out I needed to do 3 100-mile races to qualify for that. But then, like, you have to apply. They only select 100 people. It's this like whole ordeal. But then I saw someone I followed in the ultra community who posted this race director, and she posted a picture and she said 200 is the new 100. And so I clicked on it and I'm like, what do you mean by that? And I click, and these 200-mile races I'd never heard of. And honestly, their marketing got me. It wasn't some like, epiphany I had, in that they said, like, all those races, the 3 200s, they're only allowed to have a certain amount of people. And so they cap it. So they have to do a lottery. But if you run all three, if you commit to all three up front, you automatically get into all of them. And so I was like, oh, well, I want to just double down on my chances of getting into all of them. So why not just do them all? And so that was kind of the mindset. It wasn't some crazy thing, but just kind of their marketing that got me on that.
That's funny. I want to hear more about, before we get too far, you mentioned right at the front, it takes grit to be, we'll say, a runner in this case, or to do hard things. how much of, when you think about grit, you're obviously young when you started running, and initially it was like, well, I have to, right? Because I want to play lacrosse. But as you think about what it takes to develop grit, how much of that, it's going to sound funny, but how much of that is like Pierce's really spunky personality of like, screw it, I'm just going to make it all the way through. Like, whatever, we'll figure it out. Let's play, let's try it. Versus like you really having to intentionally like nurture that, get close to giving up, and then keep going. Like, how much of that have you developed versus would you say is more of just like your fun personality of like, I'm going to make it through?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I don't know like the, exact percentage I'd say, but I feel like it's like 100% of both because like there has to be something that, pushes you to just be like, screw it, let's go for it. But then also like I'm a Christian, I believe in God. That's a huge part of my life. And there's a verse in the Bible that says in Romans 8:28, it says, and we know that in all things God works together for the good of those who love him and who've been called according to his purpose. So if you love God, and we've all been called according to his purpose, so God's going to use, balloons, there we go. He's going to use everything in our life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, for our good. And so part of my story that I didn't go too deep into is when I was 7 years old, my parents got divorced. It was this huge thing in my life that I was a victim to. But then I realized it developed so many characteristics and traits in me that are beneficial. Like it made me more responsible. I walked home after school every day. I made myself food. I was like, I had to fend for myself in a way. My parents were amazing, but divorced parents, they can only do so much, right? And so, anyway, this developed this like grittiness to me because I was like, man, if I'm not, ahead in life because of my parents and the whole family that we have, because they were divorced, I got to make up for it in how hard I work, in how hard I study. And so it was like I was always just like I was always, but it grew over time, just this like grittiness of like, I'm just gonna do it, I'm just gonna get it done. And it kind of created in me this desire to like, I don't know, like make a name for myself or just be the best that I could possibly be. So I'd say it's 100% both.
Mm, yeah, I think it's so here's a follow-up to that. How
Yeah.
did how did running 200 miles, we'll say the first time, develop or change the amount of grit that you felt like you had?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I mean, the first race, like, took me so close to quitting and giving up. I actually, like, almost quit, like, 3 different times, for different reasons. Um, it took me so close to quitting that it made me realize, like, how you can be so far down in the dumps, like, mentally, physically, emotionally, but be able to find a way through. And I don't think it was like it certainly wasn't just me that pushed through. There are elements of like the power of having a great crew around you. Because when I came into mile 100 and I was like, guys, I'm done. Like, I just can't like do this. I've gone 100 miles. I'm miserable and I can't go 100 more. There's just no way. I had a crew member, Jeremy, who was like, oh man, you'll be fine. Like, let's figure this out. Like, how your electrolytes. He called my coach. He's like, Pierce is, experiencing diarrhea. What do we do about his electrolytes? How do we fix those levels? And then my coach, get him this stuff called Imodium, clog him up, then get him to drink more water through the night, catch up on water. And so he went into problem solving mode. And then also he was like getting me out of my funk mentally. And I remember distinctly, he asked me, like, man, if you quit now, like you're gonna remember this for the rest of your life. And you can persevere through, you know, a day or two more of just like physical pain. And like as much as I wanted to say, like, screw you to him in the moment, like you don't know how bad I hurt, I knew it was true. And
Mm.
so yes, like so the grittiness developed even more, But through that example, it also showed me like how there's more to it than just your mental grit. There's like the power of a crew and aspects like that.
Yeah, tell me about segmenting. What'd you learn about segmenting through that first
Yeah.
race?
Yeah, that's it. That's one of the biggest lessons I took away is a process called segmentation. So anyway, I have this watch, this Koros watch, and it showed me like the navigation because this race was in Tahoe. It was around Lake Tahoe through trails, and so you need like the GPS on your phone or on your watch to be able to guide you on the right trail. They have it marked, but you can easily go off in certain aspects. So anyway, on this watch page, it told me how many miles I had left. And if you're going out for that ended up being 220 miles. And every time you look down at your watch, it says you have 200 miles left, you have 180, you have 150. It becomes really demoralizing really quick, especially when you start to think about how like how how painful it is like when you're 50 miles in 100 miles in and you still have 100 to go, right? And so I realized through this race that like just seeing that distance, even if it was like subconsciously, was just like hurting me mentally and took me into this big low mentally that I was almost not able to recover. And then my friend who's a former Navy SEAL, he taught me this process that they teach the Navy SEALs as they go through training. It's called segmentation, and you probably used this in the past. Maybe you just didn't know the word for it, but essentially, what segmentation is taking a bigger goal and chunking it down into smaller parts. And so the theory behind it is the thing in and of itself may seem insurmountable, may seem not possible, but when you break it down into chunks, it feels much more manageable. And so this is what happened after I just barely got through Tahoe. I had to do my next race, Bigfoot 200, 18 days later, and everyone was like, "How are you going to do it? Like, you barely finished that one. You're hardly walking. Like, all this stuff. You just ran 200 miles." And he teaches me this process called segmentation. And then I go, okay, I just need to reframe my mindset. I need to reframe my perspective. And instead of focusing on the 200 miles, I need to chunk it down, segment it, and go just focus on aid station to aid station. So I pulled out my phone. I had the course like aid station markers on it. So it showed me how many miles in between each aid station. And so every aid station, I'd pull it up. I'd say, okay, we've got 15 to the next. There's a little bit of elevation and then a little bit of descent. All right, let's go. And I just focus on getting to that next aid station. And then I get to that checkpoint, whether I came in feeling great or came in feeling rough, I'd refresh, get water, talk to some volunteers, and then I'd be able to go further. And even though that race was only 18 days later, by applying that principle of segmentation and changing my perspective, I was able to run that race, which was on a harder course too, 7 hours faster than my previous race. So theoretically, I should have done way worse. Yeah, I was able to go 7 hours faster because of that change in thinking.
Dang.
Yeah, that speaks to a lot of what I think people need to hear when they think of goals. Doesn't matter if it's you're running a 200-mile race. It doesn't matter if you're trying to lose 50 pounds.
Yeah.
Whatever your goal is, you need to be able to see your aid stations, or as one of Lindsay's mentors calls your water stations, right? The stations where you're being able to stop and either collect yourself or maybe even stop and celebrate, right? And
yeah,
in that way, it's like, hey, like this is a accomplishment that I'm 50% of the way towards. And I don't want to go back, right? I don't want to, if I'm trying to lose 50 pounds, I don't want to lose 25 pounds and then put on 10 at an aid station.
Yeah.
Right. But I want to be able to recognize that there's little watering holes. There's areas where things can be
Yep.
celebrated, or you can hit pause and then go to the next one. Is that kind of how
Yeah.
you started to think of it?
100%. And I actually, it's exactly how I started to think about it. I wanted to ask you guys for your business, when you guys are helping people lose weight, what are those like aid stations for them? And like, how do celebrate people,
Yeah.
allow them to feel the progress and reinforce the progress without, having that mindset of like, oh, I did so well. Now let me reward myself with a cookie, right? Because you don't want to
Right.
go back too far, at least. But yeah, how do you implement that and help your people when it comes to specifically losing weight?
It's a great question. Do you want
Yeah.
to take it first, or?
Yeah, totally. It is a good question, because I think, again, people on the other side need to hear this. A lot of it is being able to change extrinsic rewards to internal rewards or intrinsic rewards. So being able to feel the genuine joy and gratitude of, I did that, right? If I did lose 10 pounds, I did stay consistent for 5 weeks to do that. I did take care of myself for 8 weeks. So it's both, it's changing it from extrinsic to intrinsic, and it's also being mindful of where someone's at too. Because for some people, the reward of having something, we'll say their love language is gifts, for example. If their love language is gifts and that's how they feel love and joy and connection, for example, maybe they reward themselves with a new pair of pants, right? Or maybe they do have an extrinsic reward. But I think that a lot of people benefit most from starting to flip it and just celebrate the pride of doing something great. Because I think a lot of people have been rewarded externally their whole life. And so if they don't get that, it's like empty, as opposed to really being able to soak in joy, gratitude, more of the emotional side of a journey.
Yeah, I think the key to any successful transformation is who you become, right?
Right.
So it's
Mm,
focusing on your identity. It's like, you, even if you think of this conversation, it's great that you ran the race, but all you get at the end of a 200-mile race is a buckle, right? Like, that's at least my understanding is it's like a belt buckle, or maybe it's a small trophy, but those things hang on a wall. That's nice. You can tell people when they come into your house, like, this is the thing I accomplished. Here's my, right. We're sitting here. We can see your plaques behind you. Like, that's nice.
as
But
I
the,
have these plaques
but,
behind me.
but the
They
truth is that the only thing that
I agree.
we're not talking about the plaques. We're talking about you and what you were able to accomplish and do.
Yeah,
So the
yeah.
idea of external rewards for even something like weight loss, or if you think about it, maybe from like a financial standpoint, it's like, why would you have the goal of saving 100 grand and then once you got there, go get a new car? If that was the goal, if the goal was to get a new car and buy it off cash, and then yeah, go get the car. But if your goal is to build your wealth, right? So it's all about, what's the goal? Is the goal just to have money, or is the goal to build wealth? Is the goal just to hit a
Mm,
number on the scale, or is the goal to become a healthy person? So it's
yeah.
it's it's really, who are you becoming? And then, like Lindsay said, being able to flip the script and saying, this is internally a reward. It's being able to feel grateful for what you've done and tease out the lessons so you can apply them to other areas of life.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a great answer.
How did,
Flip the table on you guys.
right? How did you reward yourself?
Um, I think there are a couple different ways. I think there is like the extrinsic of, it's really cool to see, like, just in the era that we live in social media, like, I was able to have someone always filming the race and updating people. And so, like, just seeing how many people were like inspired by it, and who had the mindset of like, oh, Pierce can do 200. I can at least try a half marathon. Like, that was, I feel like extrinsic, but also intrinsic, because it was like, okay, like, what I did was really meaningful, and it actually impacted other people's lives.
Mhm.
Um, and then I think like there are there's also that, what you were talking about, that intrinsic of like just that internal like healthy pride of
Mhm.
like knowing who you are and what you're capable of. because then you can apply it to other areas of your life. Like me completing the Triple Crown, me saying I'm going to do something out of the ordinary and doing it and following up and being a man of my word, pushing through when times get tough, gives me confidence now to do that and, step away from an amazing work position that I was in to be able to go out and start my own business. Like it carries over into other areas of my life. And I think like really slowing down, it's hard for me to slow down, I'm sure for you guys, because you want to like go, you want to do this and impact these people and achieve this. But slowing down for me and like sitting in the fact of like, oh my gosh, like this was a dream and we just completed it. Like how amazing is that? And letting it settle in also was like really like, wow, that's really cool.
Oh yeah.
Love that.
That's
And
awesome.
so you go through these 2 races. These are some of the insights, right? First one's absolutely brutal. You want to quit, but you persevere because you have a team. And then the second one, you start to really learn segmentation, how to
Yeah.
segment the goal, and you reverse engineer that. You cut off 7 hours of your time. Amazing feat.
Yeah.
What was the last race like? What was it going
Mm.
through and tasting like, hey, I'm 66% of the way to the goal. I'm almost there. What was it like going through that last race and what'd you learn through that process? Because that was the longest one, I believe so, right? It was a 240.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Oh, that was an amazing race. I think there are many lessons that I learned. One is not the one I'm gonna say is not necessarily like it's not what helped get me through that race, but something that I learned in the process of that race is I think like a lot of times we can get like in our head down, focused on our goals. Like, man, I'm gonna set out and do these races, 200 milers over the span of things like 3 months total. Um, and it took a lot. It took a lot of training. It took a lot of focus. It took a lot of me saying no to other things, which you have to do to be able to pursue your goals sometimes and achieve, what you want to. But I really learned the value of relationships through that last race, the 240, because there was no way I was going to get through that whole race without people on my crew. Like I probably had 5 people in a van following me around throughout the mountains. Someone was changing my water. Someone was getting me my gels. Someone was um, like massaging me with the massage gun. Someone was helping me get into my helping me up into the van into my bed because like I would sleep for I mean I think there was like 3 nights or so I slept maybe a total of 8 hours maybe over like 91 hours maybe 8 to 10 so like 2 hours a night so anyway, all those people came together to help me. So it's not only like the value of having a crew around you, but also investing in other relationships. And I noticed, I'm like, man, all these people are coming out, taking a week out of their lives to support me and help me achieve my goal. And like, I'm so grateful, but like, I also want to be that for other people. And so when I was running this Moab 240, I really had this revelation of like some family and some friends that over the course of the last like couple years I hadn't spent much time with because like we're just different and they don't really understand why I do what I do and we don't see eye to eye on some things. And so I didn't go on like family vacation for a year and I was just like kind of aloof. And I was like, man, I really want to make a point to be there, whether I fully support like the way they live their lives or not. Like I know I can show up as a light in that community and help them. And, there's some insights I can gain from them as well. And so, yeah, during that last race, I realized the power of relationships and the power of like sowing into relationships, even when it's not like clearly gonna benefit you in any way, just being there for people. So this year, the year after the Triple Crown, um, I made a point to like pace one of my best friends for his first 100 miler. I'm going to pace someone else for Leadville in 2 weeks, and then one for Moab. So I wanted to like give back in that way, like I had been given to, and it's awesome. It feels great.
That's beautiful,
That's
lesson.
awesome.
I do want to ask
Yeah,
this
go ahead.
because I think it's important. What is it like to run a 200-mile race? So for someone who's on the other side of this, like we're talking
Can't
about the
even-
Yeah.
pain, we're talking about, you know, you're sleeping 2 hours a night, you're running constantly. How would you describe the experience of running a 200-mile race for someone who doesn't understand that it doesn't even understand the body's capable of doing that, right? It's like might
Yeah.
seem so far away. What's it like? What is the experience like?
Yeah. So I describe it, and like I'll go into more depth, but one word could really sum it up, and I think that's patience. Running 200 miles is patience, because the further that you go, like the less it requires like your aerobic capacity. It requires more patience and just your mental fortitude to just keep going.
Mm.
Because like if you look at the start line of a 200-mile race, I have a bunch of videos of it. Like even just looking at it visually, like a lot of times they aren't the people that you think are the most fit, have the biggest muscles, or are the slimmest or whatnot. There's people of all different across all the whole spectrum, and that's because like the race, it's just so long. Like you just have to endure so much. You're not running the whole time because you're hiking some of it. At some, like once you get to a certain point, you're just doing whatever you can to move forward, whether it's you're doing a combination of running and walking. And so like going back to the first example of Tahoe, I almost quit because I wasn't patient. I thought, man, I can't imagine going 100 more miles and feeling even worse than I do right now the whole time. I can't imagine spending 40 more hours in this pain. And I think it's so similar to life in the sense of like, there are times when we encounter things, when we go through difficult times, and we're like, oh my gosh, I cannot imagine going, days, weeks, years, months longer in this state dealing with this. Um, but what I found during these 200-mile races is, yes, they're super long. Yes, you have to be really patient. But just because you're not feeling good doesn't mean you're gonna feel the same or even worse the whole time. You go through these ups and these downs, um, in the sense that like you just got to push through to the next aid station, because really tactically, you may run into a volunteer at this aid station who's just like cheering you up and gets you a Coke and like is just having an amazing conversation with you. And next thing you know, you're doing amazing. You're having the best time of your life. And you're not like super down and out. And so it's so running a 200-mile race in summary is so much like in life, and you just have to keep moving forward and be patient because good things take time.
That's a great answer. And my follow-up to that is a question that's been on my mind this whole time, which is, what was your anchor when you actually were in the depths and you didn't have somebody next to you saying you can do this, or they said it and you didn't believe them? What was your anchor mentally that made you keep going?
Yeah, I think my anchor always is my faith, and just going back to God. And that may seem out there to some people, but really connecting with, I am doing this for a greater purpose than myself. There's the verse people quote oftentimes, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. The context of the verse isn't I'm superhuman in that there's anything possible. It's whether in good circumstances or bad, I'm able to persevere and do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Like whether you're, making a lot of money and things are great, or you're poor and you're, going through a really tough time, or in a race situation, whether I'm having the time of my life, doing amazing, or I'm like hurting, chafed like crazy and can hardly walk, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And so I think that's like a mantra in my head. But then also, um, something that really helps me is like there are some times where I won't listen to music, but then a lot of times, especially on the trail, I was the crazy guy blasting worship music, just singing out loud, or just worshiping on the trail. And yeah, so that's something that helped get me through that, is just carrying the joy of the Lord, and pressing into my ultimate source.
Yeah. Well, I
You and
think
Lindsay should go for a run
I know.
sometime.
We could run 400 miles together. We have the same anchors. But I think honestly, as much as I know some people who might hear that and go, well, that doesn't apply to me. Yes, it does. Because what we're really talking about here is redirecting your focus to something bigger or better or greater than you, or just
Yeah,
redirecting your focus in general, right? If you're focused on your pain and you're focused on how much it hurts and you're thinking about, I can't imagine going another step, of course you're going to feel like quitting. If you can have the fortitude and the, I guess, just commitment to redirecting, your mind and your body will carry you a lot further than you think. So for you, you redirected using music, using your ultimate source, worship, prayer, different things like that. But you can redirect in a lot of ways. You can redirect to like thinking about your kids, or thinking about your spouse, or thinking about something else that it can be a source for you, or thinking about the power of nature, right? It could literally be anything. But in your case, for you, you had a very specific way that you could always count on that would give
yeah.
you a new source of life that you could use.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, like one of the things that I learned is like if you're making it about yourself, if you're like just focused on yourself, like I'll a lot of times let myself down. Like if it's just about me, if it's just about Pierce running this race, like I'll just throw in the towel. But when it becomes about something greater, it will carry you much further.
Amen.
Very
What did
true.
it feel like crossing the finish line?
Of the last one.
Or the last one? What did it feel like to have that exclamation point?
It felt surreal because like doing that first one, I was like, man, what did I get myself into? Like there's this clip of me on Instagram that my friend caught, and I woke up from a nap at like 60 miles of the Tahoe 200. And I woke up and I was kind of like laughing. I'm like, man, when I signed up for this, I had no clue how long it was going to take. Like I had done 100-mile races before, but a 200 isn't just double the time. It's like 3 or 4 times the time, because you get to that level of fatigue and you're just hobbling, walking, hiking, run walking your way to keep going. So yeah, once I crossed the finish line, it was just like surreal. Um, but then also it was just like, man, we did it. And like always after my races, it was always like, I turn and hug my pacer and thank my crew so much, because like it's almost like you get treated like a child for 2, 3, or 4 days. Like someone's handing you food, someone's giving you water, someone's helping you change. Like they're just doing everything, seeing me in my absolute worst. Um, and so yeah, it's just like an amazing moment to share as a collective unit. So yeah, it was unreal.
That's cool.
I can only imagine. And it I grimaced there because I ran a 62. I ran a 60. I did 200 Ks, 162 and a half. I got completely done. And then when I missed the pace time at about 52 miles. I grimaced because I cannot imagine the pain
Of running
of
4 of
running
those.
4 of those. It's just so incredible. it really speaks volumes about you, speaks volumes about your character, your grit, your ability to suffer and enjoy it. I think is a really positive attribute, believe it or not. For a lot of people, they might not understand that, but it's like, no, to enjoy the suffering and to rejoice in it gives you the ability to push through. And then obviously building a team is so important. For someone who is starting though, Pierce, maybe they're thinking about doing their first 5K, or maybe they're like, oh, well, maybe I just want to be more consistent with taking care of myself. And they're looking at you and seeing this is like your job, right? Quite frankly, at this point, it's like, hey,
It literally is now.
yeah, that's great. And that's remarkable. What advice would you give them though, as they're starting out or as they're setting their next goal in their health?
Yeah, 100%. It's like, well, first off, don't compare where you're at to the races that I've done, because, that's just we all know that doesn't go well. Um, I find myself comparing myself to people in different positions too, and I gotta calm myself into focus in. But anyway, if you're just getting started out, man, the biggest thing in the beginning is just being consistent. Like just consistently showing up day after day. And whether that's like you go out for a 30-minute walk every day, like that building that consistency and that habit is going to go such a long way, and also allow you to start getting some time on your feet. And if you're like, hey man, I want to start running, what I would do, and I always recommend, is a combination of running and walking. This way, it makes it much more manageable, and it will help you build the amount of time that you can spend out running. And so, like common intervals that I'll give the people I coach is, run for 3 minutes, walk for 2 minutes, or once you get a little further, run for 6 minutes, walk for four, and just repeat that every 5 or 10 minutes. Because if oh, I just got to run 3 minutes, like that is so much more manageable knowing that you can walk than being like, okay, I need to go out for 3 miles and run the whole time for 30, 40 minutes straight. And then when you're actually running, tactically, is a lot of people think that when you go out, you have to run hard the whole time. But that's actually not the case. To build your aerobic base, to build your system, which is like essentially your ability to go further and faster, your capacity, you actually want to run a lot of times more slower miles. What this is going to do is help build basically like your engine, and it's going to also make it so you're not getting as sore. Like if you go out and you run hard all the time, you're going to come back the next day sore, and it's going to be like so hard to even think about running. But if you run at an easy pace, mix in some walking, it's going to be easy to come back day after day, and you might just find yourself liking it and wanting to do it more.
Very true.
Great advice.
In all forms of training, that is also true. It's the simplest thing, but we overdo it so easily because we think we have nothing to compare to, aside from, again, like you said, that's the downside of comparison, is then you think, well, I have to go all out like them. It's like, well, no, you don't. Actually, that's going to cause pain. So what for you, Pierce, what's next for you?
Yeah, so I'm gonna do the Badwater 135 at some point or another. Yeah. I haven't like officially gotten in for next year. I have to apply in January, but hopefully with what my resume is now of running and like recommendations that I'll get from people, I should get in. And so all my races lined up are gonna be like to simulate that kind of environment, like running on the road, long ultras and hot environments. So hopefully that'll be next July.
Well, the good thing is you got
Cool.
Texas to practice in, and Texas during the summer is,
Right?
you're sitting around
Perfect.
100 and 112 degrees the whole time.
Exactly. It's like perfect.
For those who don't know, describe the Badwater 135. I think
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so the Badwater 135 is like literally the toughest foot race in the world. It's 135 miles through Death Valley in the heat of summer. It's like the hottest part of the year. Death Valley has some of the hottest, I think the hottest recorded temperatures on Earth, ranging over 100 25, I think maybe even over 130 degrees. So it's 135 miles on pavement in the hottest time of the year. You go over like 3 different mountain passes, and the elevation's like 135 or 13,000 feet. And yeah, so it's really hot, especially because you're on pavement, makes things, I don't know what, 5, 10 degrees hotter. So yeah, it's a fun challenge.
That will be
You might have to
amazing.
have a nurse on staff for that one.
I know.
Awesome. Well, let's do this because I think there are some really great themes that people can pull from this. And one thing that we didn't talk about that I do want to tie down is notice, if you're listening to this, Pierce set the Badwater goal first, which is like I would call the moonshot, right? It is the toughest race, the biggest of them all. And then he went, well, what can I do to get myself there? So it's okay to set a moonshot goal. I know that sometimes for some people that can be discouraging, but it's only because you stay there. Like the moonshot goal is you lose 100 pounds and you become, or 150 and you become ultra fit. It's like fantastic. Well, don't just focus on that, but like set that as your moonshot and then come back to, okay, what are a few things that I can set in place that will still challenge me and I can achieve those to get there. And then what Pierce did is then he stepped it down even further and built segments in his training in each 200 miler. Like there's so many steps to get all the way to that point where you can do the Badwater. But it's like, if you had set that originally as the goal, you'd be like, oh my God, it's going to take me 6 years to get there. It's like, well, yeah, of course that would be discouraging. So I just wanted to tie that down as like,
Yeah, and I'll also add this too is like the more you do, the more it becomes possible. So like when I ran my first half marathon, I didn't think I'd ever do 200-mile races. I didn't think I'd do the Badwater 135. It was just like as I further progressed, then I figured out, oh wow, that's ultimately something I want to do. And then I set up all these races to help me get there.
Amazing.
exactly.
So, Pierce, we have a handful of rapid fire questions, more about you, very much non-race related. But what is one book that has changed or impacted your life more than any other?
I'd say the Bible, the ultimate source of truth.
What is your 10 out of 10 perfect day look like?
Ooh, getting up early, going for a run with some friends in the mountains, eating really good food, sauna, cold plunge. Yeah, that's what comes to mind.
Love it.
Sounds fabulous.
What advice would you give yourself 10 years from today? 10 years from now?
Oh, that's a really good question. I just say the best is yet to come.
I love that. And what is the one habit that you personally need in order to conquer your day?
A mixture of quiet time with God, reading the word, getting me like settled, and then also a workout. Like I just love working out. I always show up better after I've gotten in a run, and all my best ideas come after that.
Amazing.
Love
So,
it.
Pierce, where can people learn more about you, your running, what you offer, and just connect with you?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm doing better at posting on all the different social medias, but my main one is still Instagram. So if you just type in my name, PIERCESHOWE on Instagram, you can find me there and my next challenge.
Let's go.
Amazing.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. It's a joy to have you. And I think this is actually technically the first time we've met. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've been DMing back and forth on Instagram, but yeah, I'm
Awesome.
super grateful, honored to be here. Guys, thank you so much for having me. It's such a blast.
You are
Absolutely.
very welcome. And thank you for tuning in and listening to this. I hope that you've gotten some great insights, some encouragement. You can feel Pierce's light through this. And if you'd like, connect with him. Feel free to screenshot this and share your takeaway out and tag us all. We'd love to see it. But otherwise, apply this, go out and conquer your day.
Cheers.